Okay, this is What the CEO Wants You to Know: How Your Company Really Works by Ram Charan. Okay, so I should probably just read his bio because that'll give you some of the idea of who this guy is. Ram Charan is the author or co-author of 24 books, including bestsellers Execution. So yeah, Execution, the discipline of getting things done, I think is the one that always gets cited. Confronting Reality, The Attacker's Advantage, and The Leadership Pipeline. A noted expert on business strategy, execution, leadership, governance, and organization, he has advised top leaders at some of the world's most successful companies, including GE, 3G, Bank of America, Verizon, Coca-Cola, and it keeps on going, 3M, Merck. He is also an award-winning teacher, formerly at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, at Wharton and GE's famous training center. He has master's and doctorate degrees from Harvard Business School. Yeah, so the kind of story of this book is that he was actually, I think it was with Ford or maybe it was GE or one of the CEOs of the company had gathered, I think it was like 300 regional managers. So probably not VPs, but maybe the rung under them. And he basically wanted the CEO wanted kind of his mental models of how he thinks to be sort of placed into these managers so that they could make good decisions in the company. And I guess Ram Charan was kind of tasked with the lecture of, what should the CEO, how does the CEO think and how can you think like him? And so at the end of the presentation, the CEO said, hey, you should really turn this into a book. And so he did. And that's this book. So Ram Charan talks about growing up in India and how he would often, as a kid, sit with his brother on the roof because it would be too hot inside the house in India, and talk about how they would sort of strategize about what they could do better. Who of their competitors was doing well and not well, and why. And what they could do better, what products would sell better, what they should offer. And so one of the key ideas here, it's the first idea here, is that actually a big business is actually the same as a small business, in the sense that big business, that even a small street vendor really has to think about only four key things that a big CEO is also thinking about. The CEO of the big company just has a lot of extra complexity that they have to cut through, but they're still thinking about these four things. So here are the four things. And by the way, he talks about a street vendor. If you've ever interacted with one, you can see, an engaged street vendor, how they're actually going through like a kind of, they're really using their brain to see what's going to sell when you interact with them. Maybe you look at the red scarf, and then they kind of notice that you're not that interested in it, and so then they offer the blue scarf, or maybe something else entirely, and they're kind of like, in their mind you can see the gears turning for someone who's actually engaged. And so his kind of point is that if you've ever interacted with a street vendor, it's sort of like the same mental process that a CEO of a really big company is thinking of. So I thought that was a really interesting insight. That really, he even says, business is easier than you think. It's very simple and logical. So anyway, so what are those four things? So he basically says it's built on four. Every business is kind of the same, and it's built on these four things. So the first one is customers. The second one, cash generation. The third, return on invested capital, ROIC. And fourth is growth. So yeah, let's just talk about that. So customers. Without customers, you don't have a business. It's kind of funny. I think a lot of tech companies haven't really figured this out. Yeah, I mean, you need customers, right? If you don't have customers, you don't have any revenue, and you don't have a business, right? And in fact, I believe it was Disciplined Entrepreneurship talks about the difference between a company and a business. So a company is like, just a collection of people, right? Like a corporation has the same word as corporeal, which is about your body, right? So corporeal is of the body, and so a corporation is really just a series of bodies that get turned into one new body, right? But it's not really a business until it actually transacts a dollar, right? And so in Disciplined Entrepreneurship, the author, who's a MIT professor and has actually taken several companies public, he talks about how Instagram was not really, it was a corporation, but it was not a business until they actually sold to Facebook. So they went their whole life, the whole corporate life, without really being a business. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, and so the big CEO, like the problem is that they can often have a really hard time because of all the complexity, actually understanding what the customer really wants, right? And so he talks about how the best CEO he knows, actually goes every Saturday to a store, and talks to at least 10 customers. And when he does it, is he doesn't identify as the CEO. He actually just says, "Oh, I work for the company, and I want to ask you a few questions," right? And so he sort of says, like, the street vendor just does this naturally, right? Because he has to, because he's the one selling the product. Anyway, I was just reminded of a little anecdote about Steve Jobs and how he would actually, I think it was to Palo Alto or one of the Apple stores, and he would actually hide in the bushes to see the people as they came out of the store and what they were buying, and he would do these things so that because obviously once they knew it was Steve Jobs, their behavior would be altered. And so it's just funny to see, like, even the biggest companies in the world, the CEOs end up taking the same kind of thing the street vendor does, right? Okay, so number 2, cash generation. I didn't think this was a huge thing, but he talked a lot about how there's been a lot of innovation in terms of collecting cash up front and cash payment terms. He actually calls it cash generation instead of cash flow, which is what most people, call it. Obviously, I've learned recently that it's actually good to call it cash generation, not cash flow, because the cash can just be flowing out of your bank without flowing in. So you really want to think about the money flowing in just as much as the money flowing out. Okay, the third one was gross margin. Or actually, I mean, he talks about return on invested capital, but before we get to return on invested capital, which gross margin. So here's a quote: "If you understand gross margin, you are well on your way to understanding the heart of business." And I thought this was really interesting. I was watching a Alex Hormozy video where he talks about he never invests in companies that aren't doing, I think he said, at least 70% gross margin, which I'm not totally sure if that's right, because I saw him giving advice to a nail salon owner that had 50% gross margin. But yeah, just on the accounting statement, like, that's the first thing, right? How much money are you getting in, and then how much, your cost of goods sold, right, or your cost of sales. How much does it cost you to actually generate that revenue? And then everything else is after that. But if your gross margin is low there, you basically have no room to operate. And so I thought that was really interesting. Number 3, return on invested capital, which is basically, what's your net income over the total amount of money in the business, right? And so he also talks about velocity here, or inventory turns. So this, this account, I think, was really about inventory-based businesses versus like service businesses. Hormozy has a whole thing about how like 78% of businesses in the U.S., or some high number like that, are service-based, which I find really fascinating. But anyway, I'm finding that in my online arbitrage business, that this actually came with a really useful formula, which seems very obvious in retrospect. So your return on invested capital you can think of as your profit margin times your velocity. And so it's a very simple way to compare different return streams, right? So in my online arbitrage Amazon business, often you can do things where you send it in to Amazon to its warehouses, but it takes a lot longer to check in. But you can price higher. So, for instance, if you could get a 60% return on the capital that you spend, right? But it takes 3 months versus a 20% return where you ship it yourself, but you can get it on the shelf right away, right? And it takes a month to sell. Well, those are roughly equal. And so I haven't really figured out like a simple formula to figure out how should I compare those things, or when does it make sense to store it myself and ship it out myself versus sending it into Amazon to ship. And so return equals profit margin times velocity was really interesting in terms of comparing fixed assets. Very obvious formula, right? And then finally, the fourth thing, or the last thing, is growth. And so this seems pretty obvious, but people. I thought the most interesting part of this is that people psychologically, growth is super important. And if you're growing rapidly, it's super easy to find the best talent. If you're not growing or you're declining, even it's just super hard to keep people. Not only because you have to fire people, but it just hurts morale, right? So anyway, I found that really, really interesting. So yeah, let's see. I think that was pretty much it. Those were the main sections. He basically just talks about how in the second part of the book it's about execution and how the best CEOs basically keep the basics in mind, right, despite all the complexity. And ultimately what they're doing is like trying to understand these basic things, like the four kind of key inputs, no matter what it is, and boiling down whatever is going on in the organization to those four key inputs. There's another part of the book in chapter 8 and 9 where he talks about basically getting the right people in the right seats, and how the jobs that people are doing really have to be kind of they have to be synchronized to what they're good at and what they really like to do, and how like neglected this is. I think Ray Dalio talks a lot about this, and I mean Bridgewater does it, where they have the baseball cards and they synchronize to what people's strengths are, and they have them take like every personality test under the sun apparently to do that. But and they're constantly collecting data on people. But I think this is kind of a slept on kind of attribute, is just like asking people like, do you like this job, and if not, what's a job you'd like more, right? So I think that's just a really interesting point here. And then finally he talks about chapter 9 is about synchronization, and I don't think he really did he talks a lot about dialogue and how important it is to have dialogue in the organization, and he kind of hits on these points of BSD, biggest swinging dick. He doesn't use that term. That's the term I'm using. But how hard it is where you get a room full of employees and the boss, and basically the boss has some idea, and it's it might be a really dumb idea or a really unworkable idea or whatever, and basically no one says anything because they're it's sort of save your own ass kind of mode. But then you get 3 months down the line, and the initiative hasn't worked out, and then you find out that everyone in the meeting had a different reason why it wouldn't work, and they were all right. So I don't think he really attempted or figured out how to deal with those power dynamics. I know Bridgewater, the way they deal with it, Ray Dalio, is they have the dot collector, and then they can decision weight people's ideas, right? And so they can say, hey, you really are an expert at oil investing, so we're going to weight your decisions much higher than someone who's an expert at commodities, some general commodity person, or someone who's really into wheat, wheat trading or whatever. So Yeah, I mean, another way that that's solved, I know at Amazon, Bezos would just refuse to talk until everyone else kind of said their piece, right? So basically, he couldn't influence anyone. And so, anyway, I wish that that was better touched on in this book. So overall, yeah, interesting. The four basics: customers, cash generation, return on capital, and growth being the keys to thinking of a CEO. I went into this hoping to kind of figure out some secrets that big company CEOs know that um, you know small company CEOs don't, namely me. I'm not sure if I found a lot, but yeah, just focus on the basics. I mean, which seems to always be the advice of people like the more advanced you get, the more you kind of return to the fundamentals. So